Mississippi Development Bank or enter into a loan with the Mississippi Development Bank, each in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $90 million to raise money for the purpose of paying the cost of road and street repair, reconstruction, and resurfacing projects, and to pay the cost of water, sewer, and drainage projects, directing the publication of a notice of such intention and for related purposes.
So moved.
For the purpose of discussion, I'll second this.
Y'all scared me. I'm like, nothing. Okay, no problem. Items are moved and properly seconded. Do we have an overview and/or any questions from council?
Let's get an overview.
Sounds good. Either Ms. Day or Ms. Jones.
Department of Administration, I'll yield to Ms. Jones.
Robbie Jones, Kipling Jones and Company, financial advisor to the City of Jackson. When our firm was engaged to serve as financial advisor to the City of Jackson, one of the things that we were asked to do was determine a method of leveraging the sales tax proceeds. So very literally, since that time, we have looked at several different mechanisms, some very traditional, some very non-traditional, and some which are in the process of becoming traditional. So in order to look at the different ways of doing that, we invited to visit the City of Jackson a total of 11 investment banking firms, some Wall Street firms, some regional, some minority, some women-owned. Some had done business with the City of Jackson before, most had not. Of the presentations that we heard, most were traditional bond transactions, and they very traditional, of the type that you all issue on a fairly regular basis. They were problematic because the sales tax collection history for this particular tax was not sufficient to produce a strong credit rating, if we could have gotten a credit rating at all, and if we could have gotten a commitment from one of the investment banking firms to underwrite an issue leveraging the sales tax proceeds. However, one of the Wall Street firms, which is under common ownership with a commercial bank, proposed something that typically happens in very large municipalities or for very large enterprise funds. And that's where the banking institution loans to the entity, the borrower, from their own balance sheet. So for a traditional bond issue, a group of underwriters basically buys from the issuer bonds and resells them to investors. So their liability, the team of underwriters' liability, is limited to that brief moment in time between when they buy the bonds from the issuer and sell them to the investor. With a direct placement, it's loaning what would, in effect, if I were the bank, be my own money. So my due diligence requirements to loan my money for whatever time period are very different. We invited that particular bank to come back a second and then a third time and started the due diligence process. It took basically a year from the time we decided that this made sense. So one obvious question is, why did it take so long? There were several reasons. Again, it's their money, so they ask a lot of very detailed questions, some of which were statistical in nature, related to what's included in the sales tax, what are the excluded items, and some of this information the state of Mississippi does not collect, and some that they do collect they don't provide to the public or to their component units. Some of it was just hard to track down. Also in there was a change at the director level at the Department of Public Works, which cost a little bit of time. And there were just different factors like that. Had this been a traditional bond deal, it would not have taken so long, but it's not. And again, a lot of the statistical data, and I think we talked about this in an earlier session, was very difficult to get from the state. But finally, moving forward, on February 16th, we received an indicative term sheet from the bank. And what an indicative term sheet means is, basically the bank is saying, if today were the final day, these are the terms that we think we would loan the money at. It's indicative because banks never, ever, ever make a final commitment until just about the day of closing. So the term sheet includes language saying, pending any final due diligence items, pending any final surprises, pending what happens in the interest rate environment. The bank, and I say the bank, and I have to say this, because they have asked until we get closer that they not be named publicly. James Anderson and the other attorneys representing the city are negotiating now with them as we speak, and I'll defer to the Office of the City Attorney if I should do anything different. But they have the term sheet. They are negotiating with it, with the bank. The other big difference between a traditional bond issue and this proposed transaction has to do with the way the interest rate is calculated and when funds are available to the city and how the city gets to those funds. From an interest rate standpoint, a traditional bond issue would be, on average, 20 years long. For this one, it would be shorter because the repayment is tied to the remaining life of the sales tax. In this particular case, though, this transaction is structured to look like what would be a bond anticipation note. So the funds are made available on a short-term basis with the anticipation that in 2 years, the bonds, and in this case the loan, will be taken out with a traditional bond transaction. So at that point, we'll probably have 12, 13 years left on the sales tax collection. So short-term, because it's short-term in nature, the short-term interest rate scale has no comparison whatsoever to a long-term bond rate scale. So, for example, when the water and sewer bonds were issued a couple of months ago, the lowest interest rate, and that was for a 2017 repayment, was just over 3%. For this one, we're looking at an interest rate of under 2% to start with. The other major difference is that with a traditional bond issue, the bonds close and the city gets a pot of money on that day, and the lenders, in this case the bondholders, I won't say they walk away, but they're not looking over anyone's shoulder. This is very, very different because, again, it's the bank's money. So the bank has put several requirements in place as of now. The hugest one from my standpoint, well, two. One, this is structured like a line of credit. So the part of the due diligence process was working with the director of the Department of Public Works to come up with a drawdown schedule that's based on funds drawn down at closing. What we proposed schedule that's based on funds drawn down at closing. What we proposed was quarterly draws. The bank came back, and this is actually what we would call a credit positive, and said because of the detail information which they have received, the city can have monthly draws. They have, however, said that a second requirement, their biggest one from the bank standpoint, is because this is tied to the sales tax receipt, the city can only draw down funds for projects which have been approved by the Sales Tax Commission. And the city will have to evidence that either through minutes from the Sales Tax Commission or something else. So if the city were to approach the bank and say, we would like to draw down $5 million, and we think the Sales Tax Commission is going to approve this $5 million, the answer would be no. Once you have been approved for that $5 million, then you can draw it down. What that does from a cost standpoint is, again, very different from a traditional bond issue. In a traditional bond issue, you get $80 million and interest starts accruing on that date. With this particular structure, let's say the first draw is $50 million. You pay interest only on the $50 million until there's another draw, say $10 million, and then you pay interest on 10, et cetera, until you get to the full amount has been drawn down. I'm sorry.
So just to clarify, so let's say we do a draw of 50, right? We start paying, interest starts to accrue.
Interest starts to accrue.
There,
Right.
We come and do another 10. So are there two separate schedules, and so does the 50 start over and go to the 10,
No,
or is it staggered?
and that's a good question. The interest rate is,
50 start over and go to the 10,
no,
or is it staggered?
and that's a good question. The interest rate is based on what's called a 30-day LIBOR rate.
30-day what now?
LIBOR, London Interbank Offering Rate. As of last Friday, it was 0.78%. So the interest rate on the 50, let's call it, is 70% of 0.78% plus what they call a spread. And that's part of what we won't know until we get closer to closing.
Okay.
But all in, based on the way that interest rate has moved over the past year, the total would be less than 20%. I'm sorry, 2%.
Okay.
To your question, I should add that with let's call this a bond anticipation note, no interest payments or principal payments are due for 24 months until the takeout. So there are no semi-annual interest payments, and there is no principal repayment until maturity. So from a mathematical standpoint, President Hendricks, the bank will basically have a ledger and say from the first 30 days, this is your interest accrual. For the second 30 days, it's Y.
Mm-hmm.
They would back out what's due from the first one. And long story short, you'll never double pay if that's the concern.
Okay. Yeah. I think that was my concern, and just trying to figure out when it will start, especially if we take out two. Let's say we have two draws.
Right.
And yeah, that's my question.
Okay.
Okay.
At closing, there is a small, we'll call it a commitment fee, which is so very low that I don't remember what it is. It's less than 0.3%. And that's on the undrawn funds. But again, everything is kind of held in abeyance until the 24-month point when the refinancing happens. What the bank proposed, a large portion of this money, as we heard last week, is for Tiger Grant match and some other restricted uses. So as the city is reimbursed by the U.S. Department of Transportation for the relevant portion of the Tiger Grant, the proposal includes, and this is being negotiated, that only the Tiger Grant reimbursement is required to be repaid to the bank. So, and Mr. Smash can give detail on that timing process. That does two things. One, it will reduce the amount of borrowed funds once those funds go back to the bank, which again lowers the total cost of capital for the city. And two, it is the bank's way of acknowledging that Tiger Grant match is absolutely, from the bank standpoint, from DOT standpoint, an appropriate use of funds. It's the bank's way of saying, we know that you're not going to use this portion of the drawdown to build anything. So when you get it back, send it back to us, and that removes that portion of the cost.
Well, I know it's being negotiated right now, but will there be? Is it anticipated that there will be a part of our end agreement?
I'm sorry.
Because I know it's being negotiated right now, the provisions that you just mentioned, but do we anticipate that being a part of our end agreement?
As of right now, it is.
Okay, thank
It
you.
was in the initial proposal.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing that's different, our firm always proposed to the city that they always have a cushion, never use all of the collections on either projects or to repay debt service. So in our conversations with the bank prior to the indicative term sheet, and as we were preparing a drawdown schedule with Mr. Smash, we put a cushion in of $10 million. Just before the bank sent the indicative term sheet, they called and said that they were going to include a $12 million, what in a regular transaction would be a debt service reserve fund. But since the city proactively said we don't plan, we always want a cushion for the projects that are not anticipated or expenses that are totally, blow through any cost projections. So the compromise is they're going to use the $10 million as a reserve, so it's 10 and not 12. The 12 would have been much more restrictive because it never could have been touched until the 2-year mark. What they have said is if the city needs it, they make a request, go through the same process, hit the same hurdles, i.e. sales tax commission approval for the project, and then should have the ability, and we're negotiating this final point, to dip into the $10 million cushion.
I have one more question. I'm sorry, Councilman Stamps.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. This may be the same thing you're about to ask. The Sales Tax Commission was only supposed to be approving a master plan. Now, for them to be interjected into the conversation of getting approval to go to banks, why on specific projects? Now, who directed it to that degree? Because the Sales Tax Commission was only supposed to be approving a master plan and then overseeing the execution of a master plan. But for them to be interjected into our processes with lenders and banks, I think that's a little outside of the scope of what they were designed to do. How does anyone else feel about that?
Attorney.
That's exactly.
Attorney Anderson. Yes, ma'am. Attorney Anderson, good question.
James Anderson, City Attorney's Office. In reference to that, the statute that allows us, the city, to leverage the 1% still puts a limit on the use of that money to the master plan. And so it's kind of a circular thing. There has to be a master plan. If there's a master plan, the money's being used for it, and therefore the approval of it is going to be self-evident in the minutes of the commission. And so that was the legislation's way of making sure that any money that was loaned was used for the purposes that were defined in the statute of the master plan. That's already, there's not a real choice in that at all. By the same token, the section in the statute that allows the city to leverage that money for the loan, that doesn't have to be approved by the commission. That authority is given by statute, separate and apart from the issue of the master plan. But as a practical matter, everybody's working together on that.
Let me ask this question. This may be towards the Public Works Director and the administration. Very simple question. What are you going to do with the money? And when I say that, I mean, are we going to invest in our internal capacity because the city is crumbling because of a lack of basic maintenance? Because the Public Works Department used to be at 600 employees, now it's at 300. And if we don't build our internal capacity to be able to maintain the city will look like Swiss cheese in 10 years. A bunch of real good projects and a bunch of unmaintained infrastructure in between those very nice projects. So are we going to be spending any of this money on an internal capacity building? Equipment, personnel, supplies, even the facility that the Public Works Department is housed at. I know farmers that have better workspace and equipment maintenance space than we have as a city. So are we looking at some upgrades to our ability to deliver our infrastructure repairs ourselves?
Jerry, it's Smash Public Works. So right now, the way that this funding will help us is actually to address, some of the project overages we have, but the majority of what it's going to do for us is to help facilitate the Tiger Grant funds. That's primarily what it's designed to do. We have other projects that are there. I think the master plan itself is going to come into play as the issue to getting to internal development and utilizing, as we're able to get the pothole paving machine through the commission. I think it'll also give us an opportunity to do that because these funds won't at least be utilized for that. There are a number of projects that have been designed, but work will need to get done on those projects, and that's really where the spending is going to come in on those as well.
So of the $90 million, how much of the $90 million is going to be spent on our internal capacity?
At this point, I would say none directly is planned. However, again, what you would look to do with this is to be able to, you're still getting collections in your 1% fund.
Mm-hmm.
When the master plan is developed, one of the priorities would then be to look at how you can increase, internal capacity. And I think that's something that you would push to be able to use those funds for. What I'm basically saying is we've got these other projects that we have that are like already on the table. And I think what we saw is that some of the numbers that were utilized for these projects originally were very aggressive. They were not conservative. And so we have had occasions where these numbers have come in a lot higher. So that's some of the work that needs to be done. For instance, we've got drainage projects that, since there's no master plan, they need to get taken care of because this is work that we're not able to do internally. And we've had a laundry list of those, as well as what will come of our stormwater study. Okay, so there will be work that will probably be outlined for that as well. And so that's kind of how we were looking at using, these funds. But the primary point, the Tiger Grant project at this point is about $38.5 million for the two projects. Okay.
So if you don't mind, let me stop you there. So a few weeks ago, we were here and we asked about the Tiger Grant funds. What was the structure of our reimbursement arrangement with DOT? Mm-hmm. So I know the mayor mentioned that he was going, I think you may have mentioned as well, that you were going to a meeting to see if we had to put all the money up front and then get reimbursed, or will we only have to put up our matching amount? Mm-hmm. So where are we now? Do we have to put up the entire $38 million, or do we have to only put up our 20% match?
So here's how that generally works. Our question was based on our internal process. What we've been told by the outside agencies that are, holding the money now is that the money will be available. But what we've seen, this is a reimbursable grant. It's not a grant to where the funds are just put into, our coffers and then we're able to expend them as we need to. What we have to do is actually take invoices. We don't even send the invoices up. We actually have to pay the invoices, and then we send those paid invoices
to be reimbursed.
That's correct. And so as a result, when we let a contract, and we're not really sure how we'll end up letting the contracts because, the projects are probably within, so say for instance, $17.5 million, maybe $21 million. Mm-hmm. Let's just say that's how the breakdown of the 38.5 goes. If it is, then your question, you can't, if you let them at the same time, you theoretically would need that money because ideally you're going to pay two contractors. That's generally how they will want you to roll out that project. And if you're doing that, what that's saying is to get into a contract, you, at least on our books, financially, and Ms. Day can correct me if I'm wrong, you have to have the funds available to be able to do that.
Correct. The full amount.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what this facility obviously will do on that end will allow us to have the money there. The reimbursable portion can come back into the city. The rest of it can obviously go to pay the debt service, as I understand it.
I also have a couple of questions about that. One is, how long does it take for us to get? What is the traditional time frame for the city to get reimbursed for an invoice in which it has paid and is now submitting to DOT?
Generally, it's been less than 30 days.
Okay.
It's upon the city to, once the work has been done and we've been invoiced, to get the invoice and the proper documentation over to the agency for reimbursement. They generally don't have a long turnaround window to get the funds back to us. It's up on us to get it to them.
Okay, great. So once that happens, so step one, the work is done. We let the work's been done, invoice has been submitted to the city. We say the work has been done correctly, right? We approve the invoice, we pay it, right? We send the invoice to DOT. DOT sends us a reimbursement back.
Yes.
Then what's our fail-safe mechanism to ensure that those funds are going back into this coffer where we need to go to ensure that we can still draw more money?
It is a negotiating point, but the term sheet suggested that once the DOT reimburses the city, that it be sent to a separate account at the city and not to be commingled with any other funds, and then the city sends that back to the bank.
And what do we have a date in which, a time frame in which we want to say within 14 days, 30 days, that we send the money back to the bank from that account?
It's not in the term sheet yet.
Internally, do we have something that a time that we're thinking about?
Well, I mean, we can send it back immediately. Once we get it and it's properly booked on our side, we can start the paperwork to disperse it back out to the bank.
Okay.
Which would be the prudent thing to do, because again, it removes that from the debt service calculation.
Correct. So can we get that kind of in writing on the city for us internally, not necessarily on the city side, I mean the bank side, but internally as a process step, if the council and the governing authority and the administration agree, I just think that'll
Safer.
it's safer for us. Okay, thanks, Mr. Thomas. And thank you for letting me ask the question.
Hey, yeah, you the boss.
No,
Always got to yield to the man with the gavel. So this is probably a group question for the Public Works Department and the Finance Department. You know, my view of these 1% sales tax funds was generally to use it in thirds. Use a third of it for debt service, a third of it for internal capacity building, and a third of it for operational cash flow, and articulate that in a master plan for us to move forward. Now, I'm not against leveraging the 1% sales tax, but if we don't make an investment in our internal capacity in a real way, all we're going to do is make a bunch of contractors rich, and the city going to continue to crumble. So, internal capacity building, and then a third for just cash flow, different projects that we're doing, your cash flow for different projects, so that we can not over leverage ourselves at any point, still have money to build our internal capacity. One of the mayor's concerns was he referenced the COPS grant, where we got money for police officers for a period of time when the money went away. We couldn't afford to pay for the police officers. But this is a little bit different because that's 17 years from now. We need to staff up and equipment up and supply up for a period to go meet the task and responsibilities we have right in front of us, because we have infrastructure that we put down 2 years ago that's not being maintained properly because of a degree of lack of internal capacity, right? So we got, like Lynch Street by Jackson State. That was that asphalt was just put there a few years ago, and it's got a pothole in it. So we got stuff that we're fixing that have been fixed since we've been in office this last term that needs maintenance right now. And so I believe that we must use this opportunity to get internal capacity in the conversation, and more so than just conversation, but actually in the commitment and how we use the money. So that's my tug of war here, is the overextension, and we could borrow. If the whole 1% sales tax is going to be $240 million, I'm not against borrowing $90 million, but only using a third of it for debt service. But the rest of it needs to be for projects, because you're going to use what you borrow for projects as well. So it's not like we're cutting out external projects or contracting and things like that. Whatever you borrow, you're probably going to use it for contracting, but we have to have a piece of it for internal capacity. And I just want to hear that. If I can hear that, I'd be more comfortable.
So what I'll do is I'll take that back to the mayor, but you're absolutely right. His concern was that at some point in time, the 1% is going to sunset. And if we use that funding to build internal capacity, we'll be back into a situation like where we're AmeriCorps, like with the COPS grant. So that was his concern. How will we sustain that internal capacity that we build should we use the 1% sales tax? It's 17 years away. You're right. So I guess the question is, do we want to chance putting that burden on the city should it sunset and we aren't able to maintain? So, and I'll take it back to the mayor, but that was his concern.
And we have a lot of people in our city who could fill these low-level jobs, cutting shoulders on roads so that the water rolls off the road and into the ditch versus sitting on the road and eroding the road. That's a low-level job that folks can do. People say a lot of things about line workers, but line working jobs give young men the ability to be men. They make enough money to pay the mortgage and health care. And so we can give that opportunity to Jacksonians, and I think that will spur jobs. We can pick exactly who we want. We can hire our Jacksonians who are unemployed for a piece of this. So I just want to see some of that conversation on paper here. And that's going to make me more comfortable with supporting something like this.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Councilman Foote.
Mr. Smash, thank you for being here today to go over some of this material. If it's possible, if you could go back and sort of tell us the history of this specific Tiger grant at the heart of this, it's a big part of this discussion anyway. I know it's in Mr. Priester's ward, isn't it? Is that correct?
What was the question?
Anyway, the number when I first heard about this, I think there was a number like 16 million, and I was thinking that was the amount of the grant money. Can you go back and tell us when this thing got started, what the price was at that point, and any changes that have happened since then to this point now?
So I think offhand, the best I can do to sum that up is the amount of the federal funding was $16.5 million originally, and that was for both projects. There's now an additional $3 million that's available. There are some other funds that the city will use to also work towards the project. Now, jogging my memory, I do believe we were somewhere around the estimate of maybe like 24 million, maybe initially. But since then, as we've gotten other information in, the project had gone up to, I believe, 35.5 and is now at about 38.5. That's what we're told as the design work has been done on the projects and has worked through. So the amount that we'll get from federal funds is going to now stay pat at that 19.5 million. 38.5. So
how much we get from the federal government?
19.5. There's some additional sources I think that we have out there as well that'll get us probably up to a total of like 24.5. So we will have to make up the difference regardless.
So we got to come up with $19 million.
So what's the match?
So the original match was quite a bit less.
It's
so
80-20?
Yeah, it's 80-20.
So originally we thought we were having to come up with 20% of $17 million or $16.5 million.
That's correct.
And now we got to come up with $19 million.
Pretty much.
And so
It's half.
that's a whole conversation beyond this conversation that we need to talk about. And then we need to talk about the return on investment of spending, over $20 million on that project. Is this project still viable at the price tag?
I don't have a problem with the.
Can I have some follow-up questions?
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
I don't mind those
Councilman
questions.
Foote,
I want to make sure I understand this. So initially, it was going to be like 24 million, I've got that written down. 24 million price tag. Who?
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify the question. Was that the price of the project as a whole, or the price of the amount of the Tiger Grant? Because I think those are two separate things. Because I thought we've always had the understanding that we were going to have to spend more than we were receiving through the Tiger Grant to do these two projects. No. It's you have to match the federal grant plus whatever above the federal grant covers all of that.
Yeah, it's from what I understand, so explain this to us. It's total price of the project, right? And from the total price of the project, it's 80/20.
No.
Could y'all bring clarity?
Okay, yeah.
All right, so I think this will clarify. The original application total to now has basically doubled for the total cost of the project. It is basically doubled because the original application was for about 19.5 to the federal government. We did not get that full amount at the time. We got the 16.5 million. But since then, as the numbers have come back from all of the work that's been done on the project, the estimate for both projects total combined is 38.5.
Okay, here's some follow-up questions for you and Mr. Williams, if he's the man that wants to answer this. When we got started, then whatever the figure was, 19.5 million or 20 million for the project, who determined that price? And then I'm also interested in when the price went up to 24 million, who determined that price? And now that it's at 35.5 and now 38.5, who are the people that determine those prices?
Charles Weaver, Department of Public Works. In the initiation for applying for the Tiger Grant, there's an application process. And in this application process, you break out a scenario how you will use the funds. It was divided up into two projects. One was West County Line Road. The other one was State Street. We felt pretty confident on West County Line Road as it relates to those dollars. The bulk of that money was going to be needed to do State Street because it's called greening the gateway. And so you wanted to put a lot of green application into that particular corridor in order for, to make it more enticing to get the reward. So that was done. Some of the elements as relates to the actual condition of the road were a lot of money was not put into that. And so when we got the design consultant on board and we started looking at State Street, it was determined that it was a lot worse condition than what we actually applied for in the funds. We actually thought that we can go in and do a mill and overlay and do all the other work, but that's not the case. We're actually going to have to reconstruct it. So from Hartfield to probably Choctaw, that particular section is basically going to have to be reconstructed. New sidewalks, you're going to have to cut out, old 51. That was not in the application. So now you're looking at a price tag that has elevated. And so now when you look at that original $16.5 million, it's not going to be enough. And so now that the feds have come back and said, we'll give you an additional 3, well, you can direct that 3 towards State Street. But, when you look at what a total bid will probably be somewhere between $19 to $22 million, you're still going to need some additional funds on top of the match. And what I've learned from fortification and High Street is you better make sure that you have enough dollars set aside because there's something that you're going to miss in that project. And you want to try and alleviate as many change orders as possible, but you also want to make sure you have a funding mechanism in place. So if you do have that change order, you'll have a method of paying for it. So that's kind of where we at right now. Now we have to obligate those funds in June. And so there's different ways that, possibly we could do that. I think it's going to be up to finance and Ms. Jones, how we want to do that. But I think that the thought is that, you have $16.5 million, and then you have whatever you need over that to get to that total estimated project cost. And whether that money is up front or, how we want to back it, that's, it's really up to you all. But
How much distance is this we're talking, the project? How much work are we getting done?
West County Line is it's a little bit shorter. It's actually will be tying in the section that was done about 10 or 11 years ago into East County Line. The State Street project is somewhere a little over 2 miles, I think, plus or minus.
So I guess so are we, these prices of initially 19.5 and then 24, 35.5, 38.5, are you the person who determines that? Or is there a third-party consultant that comes in and gives us a price estimate?
Well, the design consultants will give you a most probable cost as relates to what they project the project will be, and that's what we're going off right now.
So who's the design consultant?
Neil Schaefer.
Neil Schaefer.
Yes.
Okay. So these prices come from Neil Schaefer?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
They have given us a most probable opinion of what they think the construction cost will be.
You mean the parameters of the project, from what street to on State Street?
On State Street, it'll be from Hartfield to Shepherd.
I'm trying to find this on the map. I can just kind of understand what we're talking about. I know it's away from.
Okay. So essentially, the bulk of the increase comes from the fact that we're not milling and overlay in the street. We have to do reconstruction.
Yes, sir.
Okay. For 2 miles, essentially.
I'd say probably from Hartfield to Meadowbrook.
Mm-hmm.
That particular section would have to be reconstructed.
Okay.
The rest of it, I think, could possibly just be a mill and overlay.
Okay. All right. Holly Hill needs it too. Tiger grant funds. Councilman Priester.
Yeah, I think what we're sort of balking at is what is this work we have to do? I drive up State Street and it looks pretty bad to me. What are we actually talking about doing with this money? And what is it just we need this money because the Tiger Grant has now become, those projects have become bigger, or are there other things that we plan on using with this money if we decide to draw down? So just talk me through, why now? What are we going to do with this line of credit, and what's our oversight to make sure that the money is spent efficiently and effectively?
So basically, the why now is the fact that we have the June obligation date for the Tiger Grant. So that's the urgency of definitely making sure that we have that portion of the funds covered. The rest of it comes also off the fact that the projects, as prior director had given to Ms. Jones, pretty much has not changed. There was an understanding that certain projects would be into construction phase, and that funding would be needed for that. To have a major bridge replacement that total monies cannot be allocated to at one time from the collections of the 1% based on our projections of those collections. And then, as I mentioned, we also have drainage work, which, there are only, I think, four projects that have been approved via or dealing with drainage via the commission in that mode of approving projects. What we would like to see from that is, of course, a master plan approved that will then allow for the work to get done that we're deeming needs to get done, we being the city. So I think the rest of the funds would go toward those projects. Now, if it got to a situation where we didn't need them for that, then obviously we would not spend unnecessarily. But we have seen a need. I think, as I mentioned before, some of the costs that we looked at before that were provided were very aggressive. And what we found time and time again, and we've also had these failures and deterioration. So Robinson Road Bridge is an example. And so that kind of changes what you had for your previous priority. And we're going to continue to see those failures. It's not and again, I don't want to start a panic on that, but the sentiment has been there. There is failing infrastructure all around us. Even when we do repairs, there are repairs that are down the road. The support for internal capacity improvement is greatly received in our department because of what we are missing. But there are many pieces to that puzzle. It is no longer set up where you plug and chug. You can't just put people in, tell them to do a particular work, and get them to do it. To a large degree, so the knowledge that you have had over time has been lost to a large degree. We are sitting back in a situation where you're dependent on specific people, which no organization should ever be in that role. You should be in the point where your processes will take care of you and will actually cover the work that needs to be done. So in order to go in and increase capacity, in many cases, what we would have to look at is we would have to bring in, the outside knowledge to actually train them. So you may be doing an augmentation program where you use a third party in order to do that, get everybody trained to be able to do the job. Because again, I hadn't been in this role long, but even in my previous role with the city, I felt and I believe one thing, and I always espouse it because it's true. You only do what you do well. All right. If I'm in business, I am not going to be in business doing something that I can't do very well because I'm not going to be in business very long. For public works, there are core competencies. Now, those core competencies we should do. We have to work on those, and we have to try to build up the capacity to do that. Beyond that, I don't think we need to work with that. Now, opinions vary on that, but we've got to get to a point where we work on those things that we've identified that we can do well, and that also recognize an investment that we're putting in here. Because, again, we go back, the top sentiment that everybody hears is we need to get rid of these potholes. Potholes can be a safety issue. They often are. But what we recognize is we have failing utilities underneath that are causing potholes, that are causing us to have sinkholes even in certain spots. So that's the investment of the dollars, I think, is where we're going to have to work. And kind of what we found with the State Street project, you're having to make repairs to the utilities. You're going to have to look at, again, water lines that may be causing the problems. One of the issues that you bump up against on the 1% commission has been, that as well. The projects are only going to be so on a project basis, which I think has already been established that that's not really what statute says. It should be a master plan. The master plan should give consideration to the utilities as well. Because you can't, whereas it looks good to go about and just resurface wherever you're safe to resurface, you still got failing infrastructure that's going to continue to fail. So there has to be a balance between that in order for you to properly move forward. That's how we're
Historically,
looking at that.
the way in Jackson has been that we pave it and then we dig it up and repair what's underneath.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to get away from.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's what we did for years and years and years.
Mr. Foote?
Smash, initially when this Tiger Grant came available, and am I correct in understanding that this Tiger Grant and its approval, that the 1 cent sales tax commission approved this when it was like at the $20 million price tag? Did they approve that?
Okay, that's a little more of a complicated question. I think because we've been kind of trying to narrow down what was approved. What we do have approved right now is design consultants based on the 1% commission. I think that what was presented to them was a match amount.
Okay.
And for consideration.
Is that going to be like $4 million or something?
Yeah,
okay,
that's correct.
So they approved that to go forward with the $4 million?
That's something we're going to have to verify. I know it's been floated around by a couple of commission members that
Okay.
they only approved of the 4, and we haven't had a chance to look back at the minutes. But we'll have to verify that.
Okay.
But that would be based on the original application.
Right, yeah, I understand.
Councilman Stamps?
Thank you, Mr. President. So we've walked through what is being proposed to spend roughly $22 million of the money on. What's the other expenditures?
So the way that we've basically broken this down in terms of uses, we did have some projects that were approved for design by the commission in year 1 that are basically now just sitting there because there's no construction dollars to go along with that to move those projects forward. Also, I mean, it's very likely that upon approval of a master plan, we also would be able to look at needed projects that we could then identify, because you would hope that the master plan ends up being a construct so that the city can then do appropriate projects that will fall under that auspices, and then we could move forward. But what we have basically put down here, you know, we had some suggested work like we've done previously, like with our major streets projects, where we could kind of continue that. Excuse me, where we could also look at, you know, the drainage projects that, for instance, haven't gotten done, mainly because, and I know Dr. Williams will probably really agree with this, but a lot of the issues that just can't be resolved by we're going to go out and resurface, because we are asked that question a lot. These are drainage related projects, so the drainage does need to be reconstructed so that it's appropriate for those areas. So those are items that would not like currently be covered. We would need to kind of work those projects. We also looked at some additional water line projects and a couple of major bridges. You know, May Street Bridge is a consideration for these funds, because I think, was the estimate, is it like 9 million, 6 million? Yeah, 6 million in additional funds that would be needed to complete that. So that basically puts together, you know, where we're thinking about using the funds. So it would go some to resurfacing. We would have some that would go to some water projects that are not clearly called out as well. So so under no circumstances do we intend to frivolously use the money. We believe that in order to really stretch the funds that are being collected right now, that leverage would be necessary, because ultimately, you know, you can only do so much with $13 million a year.
Miss, will you finish? I'm sorry.
I can keep going. I just want to listen.
So you may have answered this question already, but just so it's clear in my mind, is there outside of the Tiger Grant funds that will be reimbursed by the federal government, is there a plan in place, a list of projects and associated costs that exist so we can see and we can say, okay, this $90 million is going here?
Yes, you'll be able to see what we have, what we intend to use the projects for today, yes.
I mean, do we have it now? Has the plan been drafted as of right now, so we can say, okay, once this is approved, this $90 million is going towards these particular projects?
I mean, yes, based on the drawdown schedule is based on just major, we have several areas of projects that have been, you know, already put together, talked about. Some of them have been presented to the commission on that project level basis, but not necessarily approved.
Okay, so, I mean, do we have it, the council?
We can,
Now that I don't know.
we have it, we can make it available.
I think that'll be, let me make sure I don't have it in my packet first.
Really? I mean,
Because
Well,
at this
basically,
time, we
basically did.
Yes, ma'am. Councilwoman Simone.
I think that what we're saying here is that we're asked to make this huge decision about what's before us today, but we just aren't comfortable with knowing exactly where the money's going. And it's like, it's in the sky somewhere, but Lord knows we need to have these facts to make a decision as monumental as this one that would tie the city up for many, many years.
And one of the reasons is, and you're exactly right, but we also are accountable to our constituents. So when we get a phone call to say, hey, Councilman Priest or Councilwoman Simone, we saw today that you approved $90 million for infrastructure. What are y'all using it for? And an acceptable response for us to our constituents is not, we'll get it for you tomorrow. We need to be able to have the information before we make a decision on the funds in which we're going to spend. And it's not okay just to say, okay, we're going to do $30 million in streets. The next question is, which streets? Are there streets in Ward 6? Are there streets in Ward 4? How is that broken up? You know what I mean? And not trying to be... I've always, since I've been on the council, I've been in favor of us going to the market to leverage the funds so we can do more projects quicker. I've been on record saying that. So I've always been in favor of it. I think at this point in time, which is one of the reasons for the comprehensive master plan, the infrastructure master plan to be approved. So we'll have exactly what projects will be, what projects, how much they cost, what's the timeline, what's our schedule. So in order for us to take a step like $90 million, which is a lot of money for us, 90, yes. I just think it's important for us to know exactly what projects will be done or expected. What's the time frame? How much will they cost? And I think that is just a baseline of information that should be distributed to the council before we can make a decision. And that's just my opinion. I don't know. Councilman Foote.
Let me ask a question frame it a different way, similar goal. I'm curious on the $90 million figure, whether that was driven by how much we could borrow based on the annual sales tax expectations, or whether that was driven by how many projects we had in the pipeline that we wanted to get done. Well, how did we come up with $90 million?
I'll address that.
Okay.
First of all, the $90 million was included in the initial resolution as a placeholder. We were not sure what the actual amount would be. We thought it would be around $80 million, but again, we were not sure. So when the indicative term sheet was received, it was indeed for an amount up to $80 million. So that's why the 90 is bracketed. It was not a firm number. What we have received is a proposal for up to $80 million. In terms of the drawdown schedule, which Mr. Smash referenced, I am happy to pull up and show, assuming I can access this, what has been presented to the bank. The bank is far more interested in two things: the sales tax collection numbers and what has been and is to be provided and approved by the Sales Tax Commission. So they have not asked for, nor have they been provided with things on a project-by-project basis. The categories that have been presented to the bank are, as Mr. Smash mentioned, major streets, drainage, water, bridges, the two Tiger projects, design work, and a broad construction category.
Yes, ma'am.
So we can show that on a projected drawdown basis, but what's not been provided to me nor to the bank, nor have they asked, is on a very specific project-by-project basis.
Yes, ma'am. So I totally agree. Did I cut somebody off?
No.
Okay, I'm sorry. I totally understand. I think the bank and the council, I hate to speak for the entire council, but me and I know what Councilwoman Simone just mentioned, I think have two different burdens of responsibility. So the bank, of course, needs these broad categories to identify how much they will allocate towards the city or make available. For us, we need to know project by project because we have to go to our constituents and say,
Right.
look, Roberts Road Extension Bridge, $2.4 million, or, Terry Road, $1.3 million, looking to be completed in May 2018, whatever,
No, I understand.
So I think that's where we are. That's where I am right now. And so
Councilmember Foote also asked how the $80 million, 80, not 90, was derived. And that's based on, it's a balancing act. The biggest driver by far is the pace of the sales tax collection. A secondary driver is looking at the project need, the city's needs, and balancing those. What does the city need versus what it is conservatively anticipated to collect and when? So there's a cash balance now. What you'll see on the drawdown schedule is that it is basically the draw in each time period is based on cash now, cash collected every month, balanced against the projected spend down of that portion of the money. And again, the spend down does not anticipate, to Mr. Stamp's point, in any way, shape, or form, that every penny that's collected via the sales tax is spent either on projects or on debt service. The city is building a cushion and will continue to, while for the life of the sales tax collection is the anticipation.
Okay, can you tell me how much is in the account for the 1 cent sales tax? Another 13 million, whatever it is, comes in. How much is in that fund right now?
Well, I think the more complex question is what's in it right now versus what's unallocated. There has been between $35 and $37 million collected,
Okay.
but some of that has been allocated toward projects which are,
Okay, how much has been allocated then?
31 million.
Let her answer.
well, I'd rather let Mr. Smash or Ms. Day
Okay.
answer.
Yeah, so it is about 31 million that has been allocated to projects based on the last financial sheet that we had, and that was distributed at the previous 1%
Does that
commission
include
meeting.
any money for a Tiger Grant? The Tiger Grant project?
The only Tiger Grant funds approved so far is on design.
Is design.
Which ones?
On the only thing on the Tiger Grant funds that were basically approved by the 1% commission and therefore contracts let and also approved by the council, obviously, is the design on the Tiger Grant projects.
Yeah, but how much was that? About $5 million?
No, I believe it's like 1 million. I'll find it here in a second.
And while he's looking, the total collections as of February 15th are $40 million.
40 million, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So 40 million collected, about 32 million encumbered or allocated to those projects.
Allocated is the word I would use.
Okay.
I believe on here, like West County Line Road has an approved budget, I believe, of $1,090,000.
Okay. We had two people. We had Councilman Stamps, and we had Ms. Anderson Woods, and then we had Councilman Priester.
Thank you, Mr. President. So the drawdown schedule and the pace of work, how much will it get to on an annual basis for us to have to repay back?
Well, the funds, per the still being negotiated term sheet, whatever is to be borrowed has to be borrowed within a 12-month period. So if at month 12 only $68 million has been drawn down, the city would have to go back to the bank and say, we agreed that everything would be drawn down within 12 months. We're short of the upper limit of the line. Can we borrow the remaining 12, for example?
No, so that's what I'm saying. So we're going to basically have to draw down $80 million in a short period of time. Then how much would the payments be?
That depends on the timing of the draws.
Well, just kind of ballpark me. Will it exceed? How much on an annual basis are we planning long range to put towards debt service?
It would be on an annual basis. I'm ballparking because, again, rates change. The LIBOR rate changes every 30 days. But I'm ballparking less than 2% of the $80 million.
What if we just reduce the line of, I'm sorry, but.
So 2%. So I think maybe I should redirect my question.
Okay. And I apologize if I don't understand.
Colleagues, how much of this money do we feel comfortable putting towards debt service? And I think that will get me to a different comfort level.
Well, me personally, I think that, well, I'll let somebody else
So that we
respond
can
first.
give proper direction forward so they can go and structure.
Councilman Priestley, like you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I want to approach this in a different way, which is, what's the benefit of doing this, approving this transaction, and what are the consequences? What are the pros and cons of doing this transaction, and what are the consequences, or the pros and cons of us not doing this transaction? That it looks to me as though we got to do something on State Street,
Right.
at minimum. And I'm strongly in favor of doing the work on West County Line Road too, because I see these both as projects that we just have to do, that we're going to spend the money one way or another. So this is a way to get the money we need right now to go ahead and not lose this $20 million. And, you know, this has always been put in context of step A is do this short-term transaction, follow that up with a longer-term transaction in 2 years to lower the funds. So I think that's the pro to this. I think the consequence of not doing this is we find ourselves still having to fix State Street, still having to do all this stuff with West County Line Road, and not having the $20 million from the federal government. So, you know, as to the remainder of the drawdown, I think that's something where we use oversight as a council every time they want to do a contract, and they say, okay, how are we going to do this contract? They go, well, we'll draw down the line of credit. So I think that's where our oversight for the remainder of it comes. Now, I guess the question I have for the guys on this side of the bench is, if we don't do this transaction, what happens?
What are the consequences?
What happens?
Is that addressed to me?
As whoever wants to take that one.
Well, let me give pause to that for just a second, and I will defer to Robbie to answer some of that. But to the earlier question about the projects, I'll let Dr. Williams talk about some of the projects that are, you know, basically in queue, but they wouldn't have funding, you know, if we didn't do that.
And I think that's what I was going to actually say, was that there are a lot of projects that we can do, but in order to stay, the commission's very into our projects and what we choose to say about what projects we're going to do, because they're very much project specific on what they like and don't like and what they like to prioritize. So I think that the better way to ask the questions is, what type of projects do we have that we can look at? Because, you know, we have Northside Drive, that's about $20 million. We have a lot of projects. We have the bridge. We have Bailey, that, you know, all that. It's a lot that we can do with it. So if they could just name some of the projects that are possible, and this is in no way committing or saying this is what we're going to do, we're just going to give you a list of the projects, and of course, take them up to the 1%.
No, I understand. I get it. And yeah, the question. Yeah, so I just want to chime in real quick. And I completely understand. I think that's what we got to early with the broad strokes of types of projects, but I think that's what we don't want. Because as me, I say we. That's what is very difficult to go and justify us entering into an $80 million $80 million drawdown without being able to say these are the projects in which we are approving. We can say, yeah, projects like Northside or like Terry Road, but at the end of the day, we're not being held accountable to those particular broad stroke. And I understand the political nature of the 1% sales tax commission, which also goes back to the need for a comprehensive master plan in which we can all agree and say, look, we're following the master plan.
Correct.
Something in which we don't have right now, which
We have one, they just haven't voted on it yet. Right.
well, I think we haven't really approved it yet either as a council.
It's written, but they haven't voted on it. They haven't looked at it, or they don't want to pass it yet.
Okay, well,
So,
at the same time, we as a council hadn't approved or looked at it either. So we don't know if that's something that we want to move in a direction and approve that as well. But I'll yield my other comments for a later date because Councilman Priester had some requests that he wanted to get.
No, why this now is the question we need to be able to articulately explain to people. That I think, leveraging 1% sales tax money is stuff that we have talked about basically since the 1% sales tax was passed. And this is the first leveraging where it's financing, because the other way to leverage is, spend the money on things you get grants for. Use the money for match, and now you've taken a little bit of money, and by putting it over here, you've got a bigger amount of money. But, this deal makes sense to y'all, and I think it makes sense personally, but I need y'all to lay out why this now.
If I can answer some of the questions. President Hendricks, I cannot speak for the bank. I will say, however, that if I were the bank and there were language added to the final document saying that not only does the Sales Tax Commission need to approve spending of XYZ dollars, but City Council does too. So there's double protection there. I'm sure that would only strengthen it from the bank's standpoint.
I agree, but I think that is a redundancy that isn't necessarily needed. And the reason I say is because at the end of the day, the council has approved the projects, right? So we have to approve the project or the initiation of the contract in order for the funds to move forward anyway, right? So I don't necessarily think that has to be in the documents. We got to go to the bank. My request is that we have a listing of projects and a potential timeline of how much those projects cost. So essentially, that spreadsheet says these are our projects. This is the schedule in which we plan on starting the projects, and so much each one of these projects will cost, specifically based on this $80 million. I think it's fairly straightforward.
I get it. Yeah. From a timing standpoint, my concern, from a banking standpoint, there are several things. Because this is based on a short-term interest rate scale, banks historically have an expiration date on their indicative term sheets. We received this one on February 16th, rushed to get it on the council agenda. Unfortunately, there was no work session the day before. It has an expiration date of March 1st, which is Wednesday. Number two, from a banking standpoint, our fiduciary responsibility is to the city, not to the administration, no disrespect, not to council, but to the city of Jackson. From a fiduciary standpoint, we've spent, again, over a year considering various options, again, all of which, from a cost of capital standpoint, would cost more than this structure. No ifs, ands, buts about it. I think from, from that standpoint, unfortunately for the lack of a work session, you have a great interest rate, but a short time period. It is the difference between what's absolutely certain is this term sheet will expire on March 1st. The city can make a request to extend it. I don't know that will happen. They put a lot of time in. I would be concerned about what happens, in the next month, 2 months, 3 months. I don't know, and I'm grappling, President Hendricks, because your point is valid. Your constituents have a right to know how this money will be spent. From a financial standpoint, I would think that secondary to that, and I will admit it is secondary to that, your constituents also need to know that you entered into the best deal. And this, as of what's on the table for the city right now, is the best deal.
If I could just piggyback on that real quick.
Yes, sir.
Just to kind of lay this out. I mean, I think as we talked about the commission, there are projects that we have that are lined up in here. The commission has not necessarily moved us to do any action on. So what you don't have by not having the master plan is that full list of projects that you can actually act on. So from our standpoint, we do have a list of projects that these numbers were based off of. And so that we can obviously give to you. I think the kind of catch to that is being able to say to the constituents, these are the projects that, you're working on, is still going to depend on the commission in terms of approving the master plan to be able to use those projects in that list. So I just don't want that to actually be the hold up to this, because obviously the importance of the transaction does go to us having the facilities to actualize these, Tiger Grant projects first, but then having so I know as my understanding originally, we looked at the line of credit for that point, that you would draw down only what you needed.
Yes,
and
sir.
so I think that was that, and to your point, and I'm gonna wrap up quick because I know you gotta move on, but to have the opportunity, again, the council always has to approve the projects, finally before we undertake anything. So there isn't anything that we would do that you wouldn't have the opportunity to approve of, nor would we draw down any funds ahead of time to be able to do anything, because we would have to have projects that were, specifically approved in order to move forward.
So completely understand. I think one is I'll be okay with a proposed list of projects, keyword being proposed, that we could communicate to, and a proposed schedule and propose how much it's going to cost to constituents, so they would know. That goes in the interest of transparency. So because I always say this ain't our money, right? This is the constituents' money, the citizens' money. So they have a right to know as far out as we can project where their money's going. Okay. Other thing is, do we have the capacity to, when we draw down this $80 million, do we have the capacity in which to get these projects done in a timely fashion? And let's put a pin in that, because I actually skipped over Councilman Foote. Councilman Foote.
My question is related to that. What concerns me is this, that as I understand it, Ms. Jones, is that the line of credit's $80 million as proposed, and we're required to draw that down within a year. At that point, we draw that down. That's a $1.6 million in interest, even at 2% every year. I just can't imagine that we've got the capacity to spend $80 million, because so far we've been at this for 3 years, and we've collected $40 million. We've only got $31 million allocated. And my question is, why $80 million? Why not $30 million? That gives us the money to do the matching grant and then move forward. And then if we decide at that point we want to, expand the line of credit, then, revisit that. I mean, Morgan, whether the bank, these banks, they're in the business to lend. They're still trying to lend. I mean, so it's not like they're going to say, oh, you missed your window, we're not going to lend any more money. They'll still be in the lending business 6 months from now.
That's always true, but the cost
may change. Right now, why pay $1.6 million a year when we're not going to be able to spend the money? It's going to
First off, it's
costs
not,
may change significantly. They have risen. The LIBOR rate 30 days ago has risen 1 basis point, number one. Number two, no other banks proposed this. We talked to 11. Your need turns out to be 50. You borrow 50.
You said we had to draw it down.
No, I said that whatever's drawn down has to be drawn down within a 12-month period.
All right.
Councilman Priest.
no, that's
That's what you're going to say?
I was going to say all that.
Okay, awesome. It's just for everybody, housekeeping notes. It's 2:33. We do have a zoning meeting scheduled for 2:30. We had a special council meeting today. It started at 1 o'clock, which is about a really, really important issue, as you can probably gather from the conversation that we're having right now. So if y'all be just a little patient with us, we want to get through this. I'm not sure if we'll make a decision on this particular item today. I would hope so, since we have a deadline, March 1 deadline. But there's, I won't say no pressure. There's a little pressure.
There's some pressure.
Just a little bit, right? But we want to make sure we get through this conversation so we can make some important decisions for the city of Jackson. It's concerning a $80 million, what we'll call, for lack of a better word, line of credit for infrastructure.
That's exactly what it is. It's a line of credit.
Okay, it's a line of credit. Okay, line of credit for infrastructure projects within the city of Jackson, just for y'all's edification. Councilman Stamps.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do appreciate the attention of the people who come in for the zoning meeting and the patience, because it is a big decision. So we've talked through basically $80 million worth of expenditures. For me to vote on this, and the major projects that are identified here are West Carolina Road and State Street. So for basically half of the expenditures to go towards two projects, I need to be able to turn to my folks and say, what's going to happen on the other side of town? Because I got a big chunk of my folks don't even go on this side of town. So I need to hear, maybe this is not towards you, maybe I need to look towards Public Works, but I need to be able to articulate something of value back to the folks on the west side of Jackson and the south side of Jackson.
I just think it puts us in such a bad position right here, not to have concrete answers to these kinds of things that are coming up. You all have a real good sense of exactly what projects and where and that sort of thing. This council should have been the first to know this, so that we could negotiate ourselves as to what we thought was important. But right now, we've got a March 1st deadline to hold these rates in place. Is that right?
Hold the term sheet, yes.
We don't, so our backs are against the wall. We risk losing 2 or 3 very important projects if the decision isn't made. That's what I hear y'all saying. Is that right?
Correct.
And yet, there are some folks up here that have no idea what's going to go on in their area of town. And that's, I mean, I've been in touch on this North State Street thing for years. So, I mean, I know about it. Mm-hmm. But it's simply not a good way to, it's not a good position to put this council in, let me say that. And, you know, it's hard for me too, because I know I'll lose this project that's so badly needed if we don't do this. But I also feel for the folks that have no idea of anything that might happen in their ward.
I would like to ask the Office of the City Attorney. It's my understanding that this resolution enables us to go forward. We have to come back, however, for final approval, which I think we're on track to do in about 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
That's correct.
When would that be, Mr. Anderson?
So, I'm sorry, just to say, Mr. Anderson, if you don't mind, if you could just say it on the microphone for me.
James Anderson, City Attorney's Office. What she said is correct.
Okay, thank you. So this is I'm sorry, Attorney Simone, Councilwoman Simone.
No, I just want you to say, what's the time frame here? Within what?
It would be, there are several different components of the timetable. Mm-hmm. The transaction has to be presented twice to the Mississippi Development Bank, and a total of 2 times, this being 1, to City Council. So by the time we come back to City Council, a lot of things that are being negotiated now, for example, would be finalized. I think that would also provide some time to get the answers which are needed. What we're doing right now is what bankers refer to as an inducement resolution, which simply lets the transaction progress to the next step. It's not meant to be a final step at all.
So what timeline, what potential timeline are we looking at before it comes back to council? So it comes here, it goes Mississippi Development Bank, what, a month?
It goes to Mississippi Development Bank for the first time on March 8th.
Okay.
March 8th, and we will come back here April 4th.
Okay. All right, so we'll be back here April 4th, and that's when we will have the final, give the final approval.
You would have final documents.
Okay.
We would have,
And final documents, or at least proposed documents.
right,
Okay.
final documents. I can't direct Public Works what to do, but I would certainly
Me
ask
either.
for the project list that you want.
Yes, ma'am.
But that provides you with another time frame, approximately a month from now, by which to get your detailed questions answered.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone have any further questions as of right now? Councilman Stamps?
Thank you, Mr. President. Because it does, I agree with you, Councilor Bearsman. I appreciate you for empathizing with the situation of folks in other areas. This question kind of leans towards my council colleagues and maybe Public Works. If we move forward with this proposal, will y'all agree to other funding mechanisms that come aboard, that they be pointed on the other side of town? Because this is just one pot of money that we deal with and negotiate with. Can we look at focusing, because the last MPO round was heavily weighted in the $8.6 million that we got through CMPDD last week. It was heavily weighted in one section of town as well. So if we could we could get more comfortable with these things if we could start saying, okay, on the 1%, yeah, you're going to do more here, but in these other things,
Right.
and that's a decision that we have to make amongst ourselves and come to an agreement so that we can at least articulate the position better.
We would certainly do that. I do want to point out that, we had projects in all of the wards out of that selection. CMPDD just picked what they did in terms of, the overall selection. But we did go through all the wards and try to look at needs. And that is even something that we did, with this project to kind of get the process rolling. The staff on hand at that time did the ward tours and tried to come up with, issues that were front and center at that time. And obviously, that has been over 2 years now. 2 years ago that took place. Dr. Williams is going to speak to some of the projects and the, location, kind of, sort of, as well.
Ms. Anderson Woods?
So what I was going to suggest, and out of respect for time and the citizens that are here for the meeting at 2:30, is that we get the list of projects. Some of those projects that are going to be included are the ones that we did go on the ward tours with and got your input for. And so that would be my suggestion, instead of going through the list, is that we'll get you the list, if that's okay with the council in respect of time.
I think that's appropriate for me.
We got one more.
Okay, one more question. Yes, sir. Just let me respond to this for you, man. Just real quick. If you can get us the email, and for me, the three categories I mentioned: project/location, cost, and schedule. Like, that's important for me. So we can get that in the spreadsheet, and also make sure so all of us have different ways of getting that email. Can we just make sure the clerk's office is CC'd on it as well? Councilman Stamps.
Thank you, Mr. President. With an influx in the amount of projects that will be expended through the 1% sales tax fund with this apparatus, would that also increase the amount of projected program management? Because it's been proposed, it hadn't come before us yet, that the program management for the next year's 1% sales tax be increased to $1.5 million when it was $900,000 last year, and it was supposed to be going the other way. Will the influx in projects for them to manage and oversee in turn increase, which takes away from our ability for debt service and other things from the fund itself?
So we asked the program managers to go back and basically revise their proposal to reflect the projects that we thought that could be constructed this year, and we're still waiting for that proposal. The second is, as relates to the list that will be provided will be projects that have already been approved back in 15, and anything above that, and what we feel that costs are projected, and we can work with our program managers to provide that. It won't be anything that is outside of that purview, because remember, we do not have an adopted master plan. So any projects that you feel that your constituents want, they need to voice that opinion as we start building this master plan as it relates to what they want to see.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. McCants. You hear that? Sage, you hear that? Okay, just making sure. Okay, great. Does anybody have any further questions or concerns that need to be addressed at this meeting? Okay, we have it's been moved and properly seconded, correct? All right, we'll go ahead and take a vote. Anybody have any objections before we talk? All right, now this is to get us to the next step.
This is
right?
simply to get you to the next step.
Okay.
The city is not making a commitment at this time.
Okay,
This is an inducement resolution, as I understand it, that has no binding except to get us to the development bank and then back here by April 4th.
Is that
correct?
It's non-binding at this point?
I'm
It's
sorry.
authorizing the publication of a notice of intent.
Okay. Okay. All right. So this gets us to the next step. I just want to say this for the record. There's not an ultimatum by any stretch of the imagination, but I just want to be on record of saying this. We have to have, okay, from my office, I can't speak for anybody else, have to have the list of projects, the schedule, and the amounts in order for me to vote in the affirmative on this item, because we have to be able to go back and be transparent with our constituents.
With the understanding that they have not been approved by the 1% sales tax, we will get
No,
you that.
these are the ones that have been approved by the 1%
These are the
Sales
ones.
Tax Commission from
Okay.
15 and beyond.
All right.
Okay, so that's what I understand. Okay? All right.
Right. There is no plan, so we can't,
Yeah,
Right.
correct.
Yeah, let's say it again. There's not an approved comprehensive infrastructure master plan approved.
Right.
But
By the
there
commission.
is a plan of projects to move forward that have been approved by the 1% Sales Tax Commission.
That's correct.
Starting in 2015 and beyond. Okay, great.
List of projects.
Okay, excellent. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, all in favor? All opposed? Item passes 3-2. This moves on to the next stage. Councilman Stamps.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes,
I've got one report. This past weekend, we had a meeting at Golden Key, and hold on for a minute, Jerry, before you leave, about the Walter Dutch Welsh Drive. Mr. Smash, could you hold on a second? We've been going round and around about this underpass for some time, and we were in receipt of this letter that it was from Mr. Robert Lee to Mr. Smash on September 21st to move forward, or he was seeking the approval to move forward with closing the underpass. And it says here that it was approved on the 21st of September, 2016. And the posturing that we've articulated to the community is that we didn't know anything about this. And this letter says something different. Could you just kind of tell us give us something that we can work with here? Because we've been under the impression that no one knew anything about this. They just showed up and filled it in. But this letter says that they requested permission and we move forward. And I want to know, how can we close a city street without coming before the council, voting to close the city street in favor of the abutting landowner, and who gave that authority?
So I'll start it off with, I think our office got the call about December-ish, I think is when we got the call. I wasn't aware of the September 2016 letter. I've seen it when Mr. Cheatham brought it on Saturday. When the call was made, it was regarding, from my standpoint, the temporary closing in order to fix some damages that had been done from the last vehicle that hit the pole, right? It didn't hit we keep talking about the overpass. It wasn't the overpass that was hit. It was actually the pole that was hit. And so, of course, for safety reasons, they said that the track, which carries Amtrak and chemicals, could possibly fall on someone's car, collapse. And, of course, people could be killed. And not only that, but chemicals that travel on the track could also spill into the neighborhood, which would be a whole nother disaster. So, of course, with the experts telling us that this is a problem that we have, we agreed to, close it for them to what we thought make repairs. I think it was about January that, I live in that neighborhood, and so I saw the rocks and everything and I called and asked Jerry, and I said, and someone mentioned to me, I think it was one of the golfers said something about permanent closing. So I called and asked Jerry in January, was this a permanent closing? And he said, yes, the railroad had decided to permanently close. So that's where it all got started. Having said that, the temporary closing decision that was initially made was because of the threat of the collapsing, because it was bowed. They showed us the evidence where it was bowed. The track actually got repaired not too long ago, had actually shifted, and there was a fear of a derailment in that area, which would be a whole different disaster had that happened. But as far as the letter on Saturday, I was I think I actually texted the mayor and was like, have you seen the letter? We had not seen the letter until it was mentioned on Saturday. I had not seen it, but until I got the call. So
it seems as though there's only one person in here that understands the severity of the situation, because Mr. Robert Lee didn't write an email or a text message. He wrote a formal letter to his first-line supervisor asking for approval here. If this was the course that the city was going on, it wasn't a temporary closure. This was a permanent closure. There's nothing in this letter or any of these letters from the railroad company or the city that talks about anything temporary. It only speaks to permanent closure, and if the administrator and if the mayor's office and didn't know, should have known, the mayor, that we're closing the street. And secondly, for us to take the position that we didn't know when it started happening is disingenuous. So now we got to come to grips with what are we going to do and rebuild our trust relationships so that we can communicate properly. Because if the city knew this, we were out publicly
correct
against the railroad company when the Public Works Department knew the truth. Now we have to be able to trust each other and communicate properly. And it's a very sensitive subject, but we got to be able to communicate properly so that when we come talking about a $90 million deal, a $100 million deal, issues, external threats that we have to stand with together, we have to know that we're on the same side. We have to get there. And so I don't want to blow the top off this meeting, but what I want to do is from what legal opinion was given to the Public Works Department saying that they had the authority to close the street? Who from legal told the Public Works Department that they had the authority to close the street? Because somebody did.
Councilman Priest.
Yeah, I'd like to know what communications we've had about this particular overpass with the railroad company since 1999. Because it's my understanding that the railroad company has actually been wanting to close this for nearly 18 years and had a series of communications with the Public Works Department. And so the two sides to every story, I just want to be able to look at with my own eyes as what's been the line of communication between the City of Jackson and Canadian National Railroad since 1999 with regards to this railroad crossing. Okay. And I also like to know if there have been any studies done about how much it would cost to upgrade that underpass and make it a functional street.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Attorney Anderson, would your office be running point on that request?
I'm sorry. James Anderson, City Attorney's Office. If you'll have Tamara Jackson, if she'll send that directly to me, we'll respond to that. In reference to a memo from the city, there was a memo issued by our office to Councilman Stokes and copied to the policy analyst back in December. And I believe that's the memo that we're talking about. It did not pertain to giving permission to anybody to close a city street, but it's a confidential memo, and I'll make sure that the council gets another copy of that.
All right, so no matter who the abutting landowner is, the normal verbiage is a order on the agenda
There's a process.
There's a process, right? The normal process. We've done it before, closing a street in favor of the abutting landowner. This time, the abutting landowner is the Federal Highway Commission and a subset, Canadian National, who actually he's just a user, but the federal government actually owns the highway system. So why wasn't that process followed?
So, I mean, in this case, we did not find any documentation that shows that that is an official street.
All right, so it has a sign on it. It has a street light. When you look at Google, it says Walter Dutch Drive. It has been renamed. So you can't rename something that doesn't exist.
All of the maps and everything that our staff went through and looked at did not show it as being an official road.
It has a address. There are facilities whose address is the street, so you can't say it's not a street. It is a street. Let me ask this question: is or is not that street on our official registry of streets in the city?
Well, based on the information I have,
I know, that's the brass tacks of it, Mr.
I can go back and we can go back and research.
I believe that it's on our official registry of streets because decisions like this, we have a process, and when people don't do the process, and Jerry, you're a good guy. I've generally been able to trust what you say, but in this case, the process wasn't followed, and it's a very sensitive issue.
It is.
So. And it's below you. It's in the workings. The process wasn't followed, and it's caused all this because the process wasn't followed. That's why I've been really on folks in the clerk's office and on y'all side of the fence that we got work to do, and folks got to stay focused on the actual work and do their jobs. And this one falter of process has caused internal strife when we have external threats. So I'm not trying to just come hard on you or you. I'm trying to make sure that the process is adhered to and that we do the process, because it still needs to be a process done. Because if it wasn't done, in order for it to be legal, it needs to be done. So, if we can get those things out there, I would greatly appreciate it. As far as the ordinance that the mayor proposed about the railroad, could the policy analyst and the legal department get that on the agenda for the next meeting? The mayor said he was supposed to have something prepared. He was going to try to put it on the special meeting for today, but the time frame for putting it on there is not there. But if we can get it on the next meeting so we can move forward with that piece, and then we have to articulate and communicate to the people the right way. Because when I show up in a meeting and a constituent hands me a letter from the Public Works Department, that the Public Works Department knew about this in September, and this hadn't been produced, that makes us look like fools. It really does. And we cannot present ourselves in such a way. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yeah, and I do stand
thank you.
corrected. I'll talk to you. I do stand corrected. I'll talk to him afterwards, though.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you, Councilman Stamps. Yes, sir. Any further announcements, updates? Being none, this meeting is adjourned.